One day, I want you to teach me how to play that.
Okay.
That looks so much fun.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One day, Andy's going to be here, and I'm just going to be over there banging on the keyboard, playing. I'm a frustrated musician. That's what it is. I am.
It's in the groove.
You get me in a groove? Or in a group? I'm in the groove.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So they call me happy. This comes from a story that starts off the book That Was Ernest. You see, he was an umpire for Little League. And this kid was up to bat, and the ball swung by, and he fell to the ground, and Ernest went over to help him up, Dr. Holmes, and the kid's name was Reginald Armour, and he looked up, and he was surprised that Happy Holmes was helping him back up. And that's when he noticed there were warts on his hand, and Dr. Holmes helped him get rid of the warts through conscious healing. And they became lifelong friends. Reginald Armour was about 12 years old at this time, and they were friends for the next 60 years. Wow. Yeah. So it was Ernest Holmes is who's called Happy, and Michelle, because that way she can remember her name. And he got the name when he was working at a mining camp because he was just so upbeat and happy in life overall. It's just his basic temperament was one of joy. And it's kind of interesting that this followed him for the rest of his life. This nickname followed him for the rest of his life. And also those that were blessed to be able to see him, and I think there was this one person in this room who's been here before who had met Dr. Holmes. But if those that did have that opportunity were like just thrilled at this guy. He was just such an inspiration, not just because of the teaching, but just of who and what he was all about. And it goes all the way back to his earliest roots, because this family, this incredible family that he came from, was just a part of this happiness and this joy. He came from a big family. You guys know this? Do you know the story of Ernest Holmes, many of you? If you don't, we're going to do the Essential Ernest. It's an accredited class, and you can get it today in 27 minutes for free. Here we go. Let's begin with the family. There they are, the Holmes family. Anna and William, and there he is. I thought it was really interesting in this picture. It's because he's the baby of the family, but he's right in the center of the picture because that's what's his whole thing. He was like in the center of people's lives. He really centered on so many things, and it's kind of interesting that he would be right there. And then next in line, I think it goes Jerome, then Guy, then Jerome, Guy, Fenwick, Luther, Charles, William, and Walter. That's the order that they go in. And this woman right here, Anna Holmes, she was the rock. This woman was like, they called her Mother Holmes. She had this incredible faith. They lived in a number of different towns up in Maine, and whenever town they lived in, she became friends with the preacher and all the people of towns because she had this daring intellect, and she did not hold her tongue about anything. And what she thought about, she spoke about, and she would invite the politicians and the speakers of the town, and she read everything. And so they would come and hang out with her, and as a result of this, sometimes on Sunday when the Holmes kids would go to church with their sugar slicked down hair. Really, she would like water and sugar to slick down the hair because it would just bang up. I mean, look at them. They're all, see how slick down their hair is? It's like they're looking good. It worked until around 10 o'clock. Then boing, it popped back up and then flies because it was sweet, you know? So how could you not be happy when you're like, I'm so happy, look at me, you know? So, but that was her thing. She would have these people over because she was such an independent and original thinker. And as a result of that, this little guy became an original thinker, just like his mom. In fact, one of the things they used to do is they loved to read. They were big readers. Of course, they didn't have a lot of entertainment. They would sit around and they would read at night around, and electricity was kind of new, around the Mazda lamp. And now that sent me off like, a Mazda lamp? What is that? I had to Google Mazda lamp. Interestingly, it's just a name they came up with because this lamp shone this bright light, but it kind of had some metaphysical history to it. The Mazda lamp was named after the Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god, which was like the first monotheistic god. It's an Iranian religion, right? One of the first monotheistic gods was this guy Zoroaster, or actually Ahura Mazda. And then the car company They wanted to be in Japan. They were like the first big car company. So they grabbed this name because of the monotheistic first God. They thought, yeah, we're the first car company. So Mazda had the car company name, and they read under the Mazda lamp. And I thought that was like a really interesting coinkadink that all this came together for this kid who later grew up to become this bright light of his own faith. And he read under this thing called the Mazda lamp. That had no bearing on anything else I want to talk about. And it's on my page, so it doesn't even really qualify as a tangent. Yeah. I know, just funny. I'll hit one somewhere else. I'm sure I will. Now, the crux of this story today is really about suffering. Remember the herding of the cats last week? The CSL theme for today is about suffering. And I thought, I don't really want to do that. But then as I started working on the Ernest Holmes talk, it hit me that, wow, this is a talk about suffering, because there was no suffering and there was no fear in the Holmes family. She didn't talk about that kind of stuff. They didn't have the fire and brimstone, go to hell kind of religion, even though they were surrounded by, in that part of the world, a lot of fire and brimstone, go to hell kind of churches. You see? But Anna wasn't having none of that. And as a result of that, they didn't live in a suffering place. Even though they were relatively poor, William here, he tried to do his best, but he wasn't the best of farmers. He tried to be a farmer. That didn't work. He ended up working at a mining camp as a cook, and then sometimes they had a boarding house, and Anna would have to take in boarders. And it was a rough time growing up, but they didn't suffer from it. They lived through it with a lot of dignity and a lot of pride. So early in his roots was this idea that it's just a part of his upbringing that you just don't suffer. Life might be hard, but you don't get upset about it. You just do that Yankee strength and keep on moving through it. And that's what the Holmes family did. They kept on moving through it. And one of the reasons they did is because of all this reading. At 10 years old, Ernest Holmes was reading Wordsworth, Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes, of course, Mark Twain, and then he read the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, I'm 58. I still haven't read the Iliad and the Odyssey. That stuff, every time I look at it, I go, oh, my God. But at 10 years old, he was reading that kind of stuff. It's little wonder that he grew up to create this kind of philosophy that he ended up creating, because he was just so busy doing all the things. And they loved games. They loved to play games, and they would play charades a lot. And one day, Anna here, in their playing of charades, her charade was, because they also kept a lot of stuff from, they did the secondhand store, what's that called, thrift store. They did a lot of thrift store shopping, and they would hold on to a lot of garments, and so she would dress up, the kids would dress up, and then you'd have to guess what they were doing. And her clue was she was in a gray dress eating a cookie. Okay, yeah, I think that was what it was, right? Yeah, gray dress eating a cookie. Her word was ingratiate. Right? Wow. I didn't, this is a story that Ernest liked to tell. I'm just sharing an Ernest story here. Don't groan at me, groan at her. She's the one, and he guessed it. So there, it's them. Ernest Holmes later grew up to say that people who spend their time talking about their unhappiness become more unhappy. He didn't talk about his unhappiness, and he definitely did not become more unhappy. He lived in the joy. And one of the joys that he had was turning 15. Because in the Holmes family, all the kids wore shorts until they were 15 years old. That's when they became men, and they could get long pants. Now, this was a good thing and a bad thing. It was a good thing for Ernest in that every time, since he was the baby, every time somebody grew up, he would get some shorts. So when he was 13 and 14, he had 7 pair of shorts because he had 8 brothers. You might hear there were 9, but Harry passed away before Ernest was born. So he had 8 brothers that he grew up with. So when he turned 15, he already had 7 pair of shorts. He was like, what am I going to do with all these? I don't have anybody to hand them down to. Off to the thrift store they went. The other thing that he did that was interesting is he had no time for school. He quit going to school. He did a little bit of schooling, but this kid thought that school was too confining for the way he thought, and that it would be better for him to spend his time learning about the things that he wanted to learn about, and he always asked questions, all the time asking questions. And one of the questions he had is, why are we in school reciting what we already know? Why can't we learn things we don't know? That's what he was all about. He was about asking questions. He questioned everything. And I could totally relate to that. I was that kind of kid too. I used to drive my dad nuts. And it's interesting how the questions you ask about sometimes are precursors to what happens in your life. I used to bug my dad with questions like, Dad, how high are the clouds in the sky? And he'd like, I'm like, like 5 years old asking this question. And where is the top of the sky? And does the sky go all the way down to the ground? Where does the sky begin? And why is the sky blue? And he would just like, and buy me a World Book Encyclopedia, and I would just dive into that. But Ernest's questions were more about, why am I here? What is life about? What is our mission in life? Who is God? Who are these people that read out of the Bible, and why did they write the Bible anyway? And why do they think that God wrote the Bible? Because God doesn't need to write the Bible. God is all there is. So why would he have to write it down? He must have told it to somebody, and they wrote it down. He was really into that early on. And when people talked about hell and damnation, he would say, wait a minute. Where do you say that? Where do you get that from? And they would say, well, it's in the Bible. He said, but people wrote the Bible. So people maybe made that up, because I don't think that God would come up with something called a devil. He was really into this. He would think that this is a great thing. He said, if you ask an intelligent question, you know the answer to it. Early in life, he already understood that there was one mind, one life, and that we had access to all the information necessary if we would just get quiet and listen, and we would be guided to some kind of an answer. He was very clear about this. Some of the other crazy questions he would ask his mother, he would say, like if they went to an opera or something like that, because they were very cultured. If we went to an opera or something, he'd say, how tall was the tower that the soprano was trapped in? And you're like, what? Or he'd say, why are all the leading ladies big and all the leading men skinny? Why does questions that couldn't be answered? But he was honest, though. Sometimes a little invasive, but he was honest. But with church, though, he had no patience. He had no patience for illogic. He really couldn't handle that. He was a believer automatically and early on in the fifth agreement. There are 4 agreements, right? We all know those, right? Do you know the 4 agreements? Really? Yeah. What are they? Be impeccable with your word. Don't take it personally. Always do your best. That's 3. Don't make assumptions. Very good. And the 5th? Question everything. Be skeptical. Dr. Holmes could have written that book for Miguel Ruiz's son, who actually wrote the 5th agreement early on, because he questioned everything. Now, this thing about school, it was kind of convenient that he wasn't really thrilled about going to school, because it was expensive to go to school. They went to something called the Ghouls Academy, and not every kid could go, so because the family had some financial issues. But at one point, Ernest did decide he wanted to go to school. And he had an aunt in Boston, so he went to Boston to go to school with her. He's a little older now. And while there, this particular aunt was a Baptist, and he would go to a Baptist church with her. And yeah, so I said, that's a problem. Yeah, for the Baptist preacher, not so much for Ernest. But this tells a lot about the kind of energy that he had, and also the kind of philosophy that we belong to. Because while there, he got into it. Like they said, are you going to get baptized? He says, do I need to? He says, no. Well, why should I? Well, because it'll make you closer to Jesus. All right, I'll try it. So he tried it. And after they dunked him fully into the water, he came out and he says, I don't feel any different. I really wanted to feel different, but I don't feel any different. Oh, well. And he just went on about his business and kept on going blithely through life. But he did get closer to this idea about there is no hell. And that in the Bible, there can sometimes be things interpreted in a wrong way, that perhaps people have written stuff down and gotten the wrong idea about it. He was very perplexed, too, about preachers who would pray a really long time. He was like, why do they need to pray that long to God? Because God already knows everything they're praying about, because it's God. So can't he just say amen and be done with it? And I think that tells a lot about how he used to treat. Dr. Holmes would sit in his library over there on Lorraine Street and sometimes treat for hours and never say a word. He would just sit in the silence and know the truth for whatever he was treating about. He was a very strong practitioner from that perspective. But he had no fear. He had no hell. And it's really interesting about the no fear. And another one of those precursors of the kind of greatness that was about to unfold for this guy. At 13 years old, he was already outperforming. In fact, one of the things he did, I'll show you this. Here he is at 13. It's dashing. It's a nice jacket. Reminds me of the kind of jacket that Michael Beckwith wears sometimes. He wears this long, with the high neck. Yeah, looks like that. But here's one of the things that he would say. You'd scarce expect one of my age to speak in public on the stage. If I chance to fall below Demosthenes and Cicero, don't view me with a critical eye, but pass my imperfections by. He would recite it. I had to read it. I wrote it like earlier in the week, and I still couldn't remember it. But what caught me about this is, don't view me with a critic's eye, but pass my imperfections by. What a mystical and spiritual way of being. What he's acknowledging and accepting for himself and asking for himself is something that he gave to others and something that he gave us in this teaching. And that is to not judge by appearances and to give a pass to those things that look like imperfections, because they're really not imperfections. We can move beyond them. We can not have to sit with our critical eye on everything that goes by. It's a really lovely idea. And he just sort of stumbled on it at the age of 13. And then I was like, I think there's a tie-in right there. There's a tie-in to what we do and how we can be. But this thing about the hell, that really stuck with him. He spent a lot of time roaming around about that and roaming around about the devil. One thing he said one time was, I don't believe in a devil, but I certainly have met quite a few. But in terms of the bigger hell and all of that, he says that if there was a hell, God would have to have a hand in it. And if he did have a hand in it, he wouldn't be God. He would be the devil. He clearly was using his logic early on, right? Does it make a lot of sense? How could there be? That would change who God is. He was very clear about this stuff. So when you have that kind of a thinking, how could you live in a place of suffering? Yeah, there might be some pain, there might be some disappointments, there may be some hurts, but we don't have to suffer from them. And that's a lot of what he saw early on and what he continued to teach about all along the way. But it's so interesting how easy it is to do that. How easy it is for us to ponder some mistake that we've made until we put ourselves in a tizzy, and then we end up going online to look at some drug to see if we can get it from Canada for a little bit cheaper so we can lower our level of anxiety, when all along what we're really doing is we're suffering because we're worried about something that's already gone by. And we should let our imperfections by and not judge ourselves by those and not look at ourselves with a critical eye. That's the opportunity we have, and that's what we get from our teaching, is to move beyond beating ourselves up until we just have to take a drug to get better. We can take consciousness to get better. We can take a moment of meditation. We can take a moment of calmness. We can share the love. We can just choose to be happy and then move beyond. In the Science of Mind textbook, he's very clear about this. And he spent many years getting ready for it. He wrote the first one in 1926, and then Maud Latham helped rewrite it, and that's the one we read now, in 1938 edition. But the earlier edition was interestingly enough, was not a lot of writing. It was really a lot of his talks that were transcribed. Remember, this is a kid that didn't go to school. A lot of formal school. He loved talking. He loved words. He was not a very good speller, which is why he had a lot of his stuff transcribed. I could so relate. And I don't even like autocorrect. I call it auto-incorrect. Because it rarely corrects the way I want it to do. I don't know about you guys. If you got a better one, that sounds great. Tell me about it. But he was very clear about this suffering stuff. He says, we shall cease to suffer as we more and more comply with the laws of the universe. All suffering is the result of some infringement of these laws. That's what we get to learn about in our classes. That's what we get to teach about. That's what we come here to study about. See, we express the love easily in our lives. At least we hope to. But sometimes we get into the problems when we don't completely understand how to apply the laws of the universe in our loving ways so that we can get the lives that we desire that are free of so much of the pain and frustration and disappointment. And as we can use these spiritual laws and we can stop infringing upon these laws, we can move away from the pain, we can cease from suffering, and we can move into joy and happiness using the law of circulation, the law of mental equivalence, the law of attraction, the law of reciprocity, the laws of compensation, the laws of Emerson, which Holmes said was like drinking water. We'll talk more about that when we do next week's talk on more of Dr. Holmes, because there's a lot of him to talk about. But that's our joy. That's the opportunity we have, is to move beyond the suffering. And one way we get to do that is to move beyond, is to see the patterns in our lives. It's so easy to see patterns. If you look at, I know for me, clouds, I see patterns in clouds, faces on the sides of hills. It's interesting that we call faces of a mountain, we call it a face. The mountain, call it a face. And what's that one that we live right here in Simi? White face, Yeah. I guess it's because the first thing we see is our mother's face, so then we begin to see faces everywhere. It's so easy. If you look at any kind of a display, you can kind of go, oh, there's a couple eyes, there's a nose, oh, there's a smiley face. Oh, smiley face, every time you come down the pass. Who owns that land? Does anybody know? How long has that smiley face been there? Is it? It's cute. I like it. I like it. The idea of seeing faces so many places, it kind of is a reminder to me that there is an indwelling presence within me that knows, an indwelling knower that always sees. And early in life, because Dr. Holmes did so many interesting things as a child, they thought he was a mystic. He never wanted to claim being a mystic. In fact, he said that the understanding that he developed, was a result of natural growth using law and faculties and a power indwelling every man. Always the humble guy, happy but humble, reminding us that we too can live a life that appears as if we are mystics because we have an indwelling power and we have all the faculties necessary, and we learn about the law, and as we just naturally grow in our lives, we will become more whole, more complete, more perfect. Early on, one of the Holmes kids did anything they could do to get a little extra money, and one of the extra jobs they could have was at the church. They had a pump organ, and so a kid would be able to pump the organ. And the Holmes boys took their turns at their various ages, to pump the organ. And Ernest was really looking forward to his opportunity. He finally got his job to work for Mrs. Hall to pump the organ. And once he got the job, he realized what the perk of the job was. 2 perks. 1, you don't have to listen to the sermon anymore. And 2, behind the curtain where the pumping was, you could read while you're pumping. So, and they loved reading, so he'd be in there, pumping the organ and reading away, and sometimes he would just kind of stop the pumping and just be reading. And so they asked Mrs. Hall, the organist, said, what is the hardest piece of music that you have to play in church? And she says, it's the pump pedal, to be able to hit it hard enough so that Ernest will remember to start pumping again, but not so hard that the congregation can hear me. But they developed a really neat relationship because she was also a painter, and she would take him out into the woods when she would paint sometimes. And before she would paint a nature scene or a tree or something, she would walk up to it and kind of embrace it and take it in. And Ernest took this in too, and he would learn to commune with nature in that way. So it was little wonder that he loved animals and he loved nature so much. That's how we ended up at Asilomar. for so many years. It's a place that he'd love to go because it was out in nature. One day at the Institute, because they used to keep the door open at the 6th Street Institute where they had their offices, and some like mangy dog rolled into the front door, and Ernest came out of his office and he saw the dog, and a few minutes later he and the dog were rolling around on the ground together. That's the kind of guy that this man was, and that's why people thought that he was a mystic, because everybody else was kind of afraid of this dog because he was kind of vicious, but Ernest walked right up to him and calmed him right down. You see, this is the guy that we're talking about. And so when you look at with the 2020 hindsight, it appears that these are signals of his mystical nature, but that's just the way he was. We turn it around. We like to make meaning out of things. But this quote right here does seem to hint to the quote that Jesus gives us from John 12, where he says, most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will also do. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to the Father. And the tie-in here is, if we practice the laws and utilize the laws, right, and we go to the Father is the indwelling presence within each and every one of us. So if we go to that indwelling presence within us, understanding the laws and don't infringe upon those laws, we will put ourselves in a place to do greater works than we've ever done before. We'll put ourselves into a place where we move beyond suffering and beyond the pain of everyday life into a joyous experience, so that the challenges and opportunities become something exciting, because we know we have this inner power within us that we can move beyond it. We can get past it. You see, this has come to pass. Not to stay. That's right, Jerry. Not to stay. It's come to pass. Wisdom. Wisdom from the Wisdom Keeper Supreme. Absolutely. So as we go out of here today, and we think about some of the things that have been nagging at us, like the tooth, your tongue goes back over the problem over and over again. Know that you have this ability within you, this inner knower. We have this wonderful teaching from a kid who came from pretty challenging roots and never dealt with the sadness of it and stayed in the pain of it, always stayed on the optimistic side of it. That's the roots of our teaching. This is why when we come here, we come away feeling so good. It's because it came from a place of people who felt really good and celebratory about life. So as we go out of here today, let's choose not to suffer. Sure, stuff doesn't feel good sometimes. Got it. Disappointments arise. Absolutely. Didn't get what you wanted. I didn't win the Powerball last night. Not a problem. Nobody won it. It's gonna be $1.2 million next week. $1 billion. Crazy. The lines will be out the door. But you know what? You don't need to win the Powerball to win the game of life. You simply have to trust the inner knower. Trust the belief that you have in yourself, and allow that self to rise up. And pretty soon, they'll be calling you happy. All right? And so it is. So that brings us back to our affirmation. Let's do it one more time. Just drill it in. And I want to remind you to post it, tweet it, share it. And when when you're on Facebook or doing your Twitter or your Instagram account or whatever, we do have a hashtag. That's us. Hashtag CSLSeeMe. Put that on all the stuff that you post. That way, when somebody wants to see what we're doing, they can just search hashtag CSLSeeMe, and boom, all this stuff will come up, and they'll see what a presence we are on the internet. Because I see us all the time on Facebook. I got a Facebook and family around here. So let's join together by putting our hashtag on things. Here we go. Are you ready? My mind is open and receptive, guided by an all-powerful, infinitely intelligent presence within me, forever perfect, loving, and giving, and so it is. Nice. All right. Just a sec. We're going to do prayer. But you want to play underneath it? Fine. Fine. I got Andy here. I love that. No! It wasn't just like no. It's like no! Let's breathe into the moment. Okay, so we've already decided we're not going to suffer, but we're also not living by a river in Egypt. We're not going to be in denial either. We're going to recognize that sometimes things aren't working, but we have the power within us to move through whatever may not be working. So if there's something that's not working in your life or in the life of someone you know, if there's someone you know that's looking for the perfect healing, that's going through a health challenge or a financial challenge or a relationship challenge, right now we're going to know their truth, their wholeness, and their perfection, and that includes that of the world as well. So join me in prayer, knowing that there is one life, that life is God, that life is my life, and the life of everyone in this room and everyone watching online at this moment. And all those that are feeling something just hit them. What is that? It's God showing up in a conscious way. So we drop the veil that separates us from the divine and know that we are one with everything in this moment. And it is from this space of oneness that I speak this word of wholeness and perfection and complete abandon into the infinite possibilities of good unfolding. So I am calling forth right action. I'm putting the kiss of harmony and wholeness on each and every person. I'm bringing forth well-being. I'm calling on the law of abundance to spread infinite givingness to all. Prosperity, perfect flow, ideas unfolding, inspiration downloading. Life is good. And the good is being delivered into the lives of each and every person in this room, each and every person we are holding in our heart right now, each and every person we have on our minds, that the intentions that we've set forth and the ideas that we are explaining to ourselves don't need explanation to the divine. It already knows. It's already saying yes. There's a power in conscious thought. There's a power in directed thought. And there's a power listening to that thought. And there's a presence, a creative medium that is waiting with bated breath to say yes and to deliver it as an experience in life. So we say yes to that. We applaud it with gratitude, and we release this prayer into a perfect law that hears the word spoken. Feeling complete with me now? Let's say it. And so it is. Amen.